Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joseph Attic, Executive Chairman of ID for Africa, and this is our 34th LiveCast. I'd like to warmly welcome you all to the Season 5 premiere, and thank you for being with us for this exciting restart of the LiveCasts. I also like to thank our development partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for being back with us for this new season. Their support has enabled us to produce a significant body of digital public goods for strategic capacity building in the service of development worldwide. All of this trustworthy knowledge is available for replay on the ID for Africa YouTube library. I'd like to also welcome those who are new to our community and to remind everyone that we need your support, as always, to get the word out. If you find the LiveCasts helpful or interesting, please like, share, and subscribe. This simple act tells the Google algorithm that this is content worth proposing to others on YouTube. Because of your efforts, we are now regularly reaching identity stakeholders from 148 countries around the world. I thank you in advance for helping your movement in its continued outreach campaign. Also, for those who are new to this medium, let me explain. The LiveCasts are multi-segment sessions of knowledge exchange covering various themes, recorded in front of a live Zoom audience. So come for the segment you like, stay for the rest, and always watch what you miss on YouTube. Attending the live recording gives you, however, the chance to interact with the community through the chat, the question and answer, and through the Community Voices platform. You will also benefit from simultaneous English-French interpretation. So we urge you to attend live, at the very least, your segments of direct interest. Today, we have an outstanding lineup. In the first segment, we will have the exceptional opportunity to speak with the Honorable Minister Sina Lawson about Togo's digitalization journey. Then we will dialogue with the leaders of major identity authorities about their business models and practices. And last but not least, we will get an update on Africa's youngest identity program through the i-On-Africa segment. So stick around. This is content you cannot afford not to watch. Also, you will have several opportunities to be elevated onto the 3 panels through the community voices. Just prepare your camera and raise your hand to register your interest with an operator at the time when I open participation to the audience. This is going to be i-On-Ethiopia. In our continuing i-On-Africa series today, we're going to present i-On-Ethiopia. Ethiopia is among the latest entrants into the digital identity world, but they're advancing rapidly in planning and preparation for this major initiative. We are very pleased to have with us actually the team that is making the progress on the ground to give us a sneak peek into the working process, share lessons learned, and unveil their vision going forward. I want to emphasize what makes this even more fascinating is the fact that we will be talking about work in progress, something we do not get the opportunity to do that often. So welcome, Yodehi and the project team. You are in the process of developing a large-scale ID project pretty much from scratch. Can you kick off this segment by telling our audience what is this project about?
Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph. As you have aptly introduced us at the beginning, we can be considered one of the youngest national ID programs in Africa. We have not yet celebrated our 2nd birthday. The pilot project has been launched as of mid-2021, and we've completed the pilot project last June. Since then, we're preparing and taking the first steps to make a full launch, a full country rollout. We're making sure the foundation is ready for a country rollout. The name of our project is, we call the project in our local language fida. It's legally known as the Ethiopian Digital Identification Program or National ID Program. We use both digital and national interchangeably. It's relatively greenfield. There is no other national level ID program in Ethiopia, even though we have other national identification documents, paper-based or more conventional legacy document we call Kabali ID. This project has officially been approved by the Council of Ministers as a legal entity, so that the identification we provide, the digital identification we provide, can be considered as a legal ID. It was approved a few months ago, last June. Currently, it resides under the Prime Minister's office. We report to the Office of the Prime Minister, and we exist as a project, not as a permanent authority. But with regards to, this is the governance from the legal perspective, but where does our production systems reside? How do we manage all of that? We use government-provided data centers to host our services as of now, even though we are thinking of various and hybrid options going into the future. Thank you.
So Yodahe, is this fida platform or fida identity, is this a legal identity, or is it an economic identity or a digital economic identity?
We consider it to be both. The United Nations defines legal identity as it closely relates to a civil registration, as in identity from birth, but it can also, according to the United Nations, they also define it as an identification provided by an ID authority. Hence, our ID is basically contains foundational basic personal attributes, name, gender, date of birth, and current address, in addition to biometrics. So it can be defined both as a legal identity as well as economic identity. An identification used for economic transformation, because it's mainly targeted towards service provision.
And so let's talk a little bit about what is driving this project. I mean, I assume there are functional ID systems in the country. Maybe we can talk a little bit about them. What's deficient about them, and why do you need to go and reform by creating a brand new ID project?
So the why is a very crucial and critical question. Most of our development targets as a nation, as government, rely on digital transformation and digital economy. It's impossible to achieve some of these sustainable development goals without digital transformation. Also, for some of these sustainable development goals, identification at the individual level is important. Identity is a right. It will allow you to get services, financial inclusion, access to credit, access to social services, etc. So the why is more from the perspective of the resident than from the government wanting to collect data, but it's more from the perspective of the resident, so that the resident can receive service as they should. So the rationale is more towards service delivery, increasing efficiency, and the like.
Maybe you can bring in some of your team on talking about priority services. Sort of what kind of priority services would you think this program needs to be empowering?
So perhaps Henok can start by describing a little bit about the priority sectors we've been dealing with so far in our pilot as well as in the current phase.
Henok, unmute, please. I think maybe we have frozen the screen. No, the screen is frozen.
Okay, we'll try to have Henok reconnect.
Yes, try to reconnect. In the meantime, maybe we can move on to another priority to try to understand, especially.
Well, Miriam, you can come in about, from your perspective, priority sectors.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. It was very informative to hear the previous speakers. Thank you very much, Dr. Atik, to for organizing this. So yeah, the role of the digital ID within the context of the vision of our digital transformation roadmap is very important. Ethiopia recognizes the transformational impact that the fourth industrial revolution can have on countries' development. So we very rapidly responded to the need of progressing towards digital economy, as Yodai was mentioning. And that meant really having an inclusive digital transformation strategy. And that's how Digital Ethiopia was adopted by the Council of Ministers. It's been 2 years now. The vision is really to innovate, create, and adopt new and future technologies to allow inclusive interactions between citizens. And we've identified the building blocks of our strategy. And the first building block was the establishment of the National Digital ID, designed as a foundational systems that would serve all sectors and be an essential function of proving the identity of our citizens, of our residents. The second was the interoperable payment systems. So really banking the unbanked. Ethiopia has still a very low financial inclusion rate. We are currently around 45%. So it was really it is a focus to make sure that we have payment systems in place and that we are able to bank the unbanked. E-government applications, so e-services portal, and creating an enabling ecosystem for e-commerce platforms. So all of them have as a unifying factor the digital identity, and specifically in the electronic environment, because we believe it will facilitate communication and collaboration between what is today very siloed organizational or ministries. And we think also it will further heighten security. So as you have heard around fida, it's not a number that provides rights or benefit, but different ministries and businesses or agencies can use it, can use the number by linking their services to the database. And this means that it is designed to support multiple services, whereby it is used by all services, all service rendering entities.
Actually, when I first heard the name FIDA, I thought it was brilliant. So could you please explain to our audience, what does FIDA mean? It's not called the national ID number, it is called the FIDA number. So what is FIDA?
Unless you're dying.
Yeah, so some of our speakers maybe may know Swahili. They would know what the meaning of FIDA is, or Arabic as well. So it's a very common word among many languages, including a lot of Ethiopian languages, and the meaning is value. FIDA means value, so FIDA number is like value number.
And basically, it gives the citizen immediately, the resident or the citizen, the impression immediately what this is about. This is about bringing me my value, the value of my identity, empowering my identity through this value. So is this an official name in the Act itself?
So in the Act, it's referred to as Ethiopian Digital Identification, or the number, it's called the unique identification number. So it's not coded in the Act, but it's a name that we plan to adopt for awareness and on the day-to-day, we want the bank teller to say, give me your FIDA number, etc.
Yeah, I mean, this is like Aadhaar. Aadhaar is infrastructure. FIDA is, so I think we should be collecting the different names that identity numbers are now accumulating around the world, with each with its own local meaning, which is wonderful. So that's a sidebar, because I'm sure our audience would find it as interesting as I found it. And thank you for that explanation. So Yodehe, maybe you can answer this question or direct it to somebody on your team. What I want to understand, I mean, surely the country, Ethiopia, already has several ID systems, maybe mostly functional ID systems. And so how do Ethiopians identify themselves today, and how does the fida in the future integrate with these other systems? Replace them, integrate with them, seed them, link to them? I mean, what is the vision that you guys can explain to us, the role of fida in the Ethiopian current and future ID ecosystem?
Let me let Henok explain a little bit about the legacy and the most prevalent type of identification that we have now on ground called Kabale ID. Henok.
Yes, thank you, Yudahe. Thank you, Dr. Atik. It's good to join you back again. I apologize for the connection issues. Surely there are identification systems in Ethiopia. So identity or identification in Ethiopia is somehow a complex issue so far. So people sometimes do not necessarily associate with the unique attributes of a person which are used to identify a person uniquely. But we believe the introduction of fida now will decouple those additional ones or layers from the basic identification features, where we think to we plan to identify people by those unique attributes that they have. So Ethiopia, as you know, is a federal country, and there are federal and regional government structures. So following that, there is a decentralized approach, which gives an autonomous power to the region. So following that, there are some differences between the regions in the implementation of identification so far. fida will be implemented at the federal level, so we expect to have a similar implementation throughout the country. So the main identification system, be it at federal level in Addis Ababa or regional regions and cities administrations, it is the Kabale ID, as Mr. Yudahi has mentioned earlier. The Kabale ID is primarily a functional ID that is used for the purpose of proving residence, but because of the lack of other foundational ID systems, the Kabale ID was pretty much used as that single one document that has been used across the board. So other documentations do also exist in Ethiopia, such as birth certificates, driving license, passports, and all of these have their issues, limitednesses in terms of accessibility and use. So the Kabale system is basically a paper-based system that is done or given at local level using at the smallest administration unit that is called Kabale. So there is an issue of accessibility and fraud and problem of automatic traceability associated with Kabale IDs, because it's not centralized or it is not connected to a database. We can also take other legacy systems, that is such as the tax ID system. We call it tax identification number or TIN number. So this one has more identification features compared to the Kabale ID, such as fingerprints along with photo. But the issue with the TIN number is also, it is not complete. The fingerprint is sometimes not complete. And there is a possibility of having TIN numbers at different locations or for different business categories. So it's not basically a unique identifier so far. Also, only close to 7 million people have been issued with this TIN number so far. We have conventional KYC system that is still mostly, for the most part, paper-based, where they take your ID card and keep a photocopy of it. And if for some high-level transactions, including high-level financial transactions, if authentication is needed, that is mostly done manually, and that means it takes a number of days. There are also, we would like to acknowledge that there are recent attempts to improve on that. The other is additional documents are sometimes required if you want to get a certain service from the government office or other actors. So additional documents are required. So these are the limitations of the existing system that we have in Ethiopia. Thank you.
What about birth registration? Where does Ethiopia stand on this issue?
So let me chime in on this one. Birth registration, every regional government maintains its own vital statistics and civil registration. That includes resident ID, births, the usual vital and civil registration. Hence, the birth registration is at a very low adoption rate, both in urban and rural settings. And we hope, looking forward, we've had discussions with Ethiopian Immigration and Civil Registration Service. So looking forward, the data, the biometric-based unique ID, the fida ID we provide, can be leveraged to issue more civil registration documents such as birth and marriage, etc.
Okay, so fair to say that, you know, the demand for the fida ID system is basically modernizing, reforming, and creating a more flexible and a more inclusive and an ID system that can be more suitable for service delivery, because it can exist in a digital format. It can support biometric authentication, and therefore identity service verification would be available in support of services. So in a way, there is nothing special about the needs of Ethiopia that drove this. What makes fida sort of Ethiopian per se? Is there anything beyond what we've heard from other countries that motivate the need for an ID system?
Perhaps let me open this question to Al, as he has been very close with the project since its inception, and maybe you can share a few points what makes our ID program stand out.
Sure, I'd love to, and thank you everybody and Dr. Attic for the invitation. So from the very get-go, it was a very clear move by the government to make sure that that was going to be done, could be different aspects of the work. Starting with the system, the former representation, the minister from Togo talked about MOSIP. So Ethiopia has one of the very early adopters of the.
Al, we're losing you. Your connection please.
Okay, great. So so thanks everybody for the presentation so far. Very happy to be here. So from the very beginning, I think this work is key for a number of sectors in Ethiopia. As my co-panelist Miriam mentioned earlier, with the Digital Ethiopia concept, there were two pillars that was mentioned there. So one was the digital ID, and then secondly was the financial system. So we collectively call these the digital public infrastructure. But for that to happen, we felt that it was important that the government and the Ethiopian population can own the project and own the system. And by ownership, we mean to have an ability not just to adopt, we adopt various strong systems from all over the world, but the idea, a minimum we assumed should be, is that where we can at least maintain the system locally and be able to operate them locally. So a key decision was made early on to make sure that whatever was selected met these two requirements. So I'm proud to say that Ethiopia was one of the early adopters of MOSIP. In fact, even before the pilot that we'll be hearing shortly, we've been able to identify key developers and strong project management team that can maintain and build on the MOSIP operating system. But we're extending that not just on the software side, but from the implementation aspect as well. So, in a project, it's not the systems or the product that make it work, but it's actually the overall project management, the leadership, and the structure, and so on. So, from that sense, the belief in the principle has been locally owned, locally maintained and operated, but at the same time also to be able to contribute to the global community. So we take that, but we're able to make sure that we can meet the demands of the country locally, but also expand it throughout the globe.
Okay. Actually, that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, you basically wanted to make sure that you are able to support every aspect of this project, including helping yourself to make any changes, interacting with other players who might contribute to this ecosystem, etc. So I will drill down a little bit more about this, but let us get into the business of how do you plan a Greenfield project like this? I mean, this did not happen where you guys sat around in a cafe somewhere in Addis Ababa and said, "Ooh, it'd be nice to have this." What were the steps that you had to go through in order to see the birth of a project? What was the planning process? Were there any resistance? How did you overcome it? I mean, tell us a story about how do you go about doing such a thing?
So the idea for a national ID where there is one database, that's a single source of truth for identification, is not very new to Ethiopia. The project has existed in one form or another for well more than a decade. But the philosophy behind it, of course, changed. At first, it was more focused on avoiding identity fraud, catching ghost accounts, etc., etc. But now it's more focused on the identity fraud cases, the ghost account cases they constitute 1%. Now it's focusing more on the 99%. It's about increasing efficiency, allowing service providers to give value-added services, etc. But as a Greenfield project, we definitely do face, we are basically disruptors. We are changing how KYC is done, how identity verification is done, etc. in basically all sectors. That's our aim and that's our vision. And even in the pilot, we faced challenge, and we expect to face more challenge as we go into the national rollout.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting to listen to you talk about the changing perspective, how important it is. I mean, 15 years ago, identity was motivated by security, national security. Then it was motivated by combating crime and fraud and stopping fraud from happening. Now we're talking about identity being a pillar in digital transformation and empowering people. It is the heart of the ID for D agenda, which is, we're not really talking about the 1% fraud cases. We can make those part of the cost of doing business. But what we're talking about is dramatically game-changing how people interact and how economies are built and sustained and made to grow. So this is an important way to approach your project. So if you're trying to build a project, I think it's important to assess and understand its role in the economic and social development of the country. So wonderful. So you went through that step. What else can you tell us? What happened? How did you identify the stakeholders? Did you bring them in a room? Did you invite them? Did you build bridges? Can you talk about stakeholder development?
Perhaps I can start with a few examples, and my colleagues can also add some of the very ripe or low-hanging fruits as use cases. Ministry of Transport is a good example. The Ethiopian Ministry of Transport is still in the process of rolling out a new smart transportation system, smart driver's license, smart vehicle ownership certificate, etc. So one of the requirements is to make sure that the driver is unique, the vehicle owner as an individual is unique. So every project in the past had gone about building their own KYC and ID ecosystem. A good example in Ethiopia is the Ethiopian Ministry of Revenues, where they deployed a biometric system to identify taxpayers. We call it the TIN number. So now we go about pitching to different ministries, to different national projects, regional projects, even private sector services, including private banks, saying that you do not need to build an independent ID ecosystem. Maintaining is difficult, it's costly. Also, it's not cross-sectoral. If there is a farming project, it's not, they do not know if it's the same farmer that's borrowing money with the banks, and if it's the same person seeking social services or health services, etc. So that's the value proposition we provide, and so far we've been very successful in working with a lot of national projects and in garnering their support in working together. I'll open the floor to my colleagues.
And I can pick up from Yudai a little bit. So I want to think of two words that was mentioned earlier, silos and ecosystems. So as a foundational system with digital ID, we're talking about basically there's a foundation of foundational systems. In many cases, a lot of the information systems that was developed in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has really done great strides in building information systems across the sectors. So health, Yudai mentioned transportation, where I mentioned finances. However, the limitation has been that from the ability from these sectors to talk to each other. And what was missing in the middle is this underlining rail that I'm going to pick up from our former speaker from India mentioned. So what digital ID basically provides us are two components of this. One is the registries. So by registries, we're basically talking about the individual, but it could be registries from, say, professional health workers that we can tie to health facilities, or we can think of registries in terms of students or teachers. And to be able to link that to the other infrastructure that was mentioned earlier with finance, and to be able to really empower these siloed sectors into providing better enhanced optimized services. So I really want to touch on the fact that we're looking at ID more from as a value add for the citizen, to be able to get them services faster and not to get into or waste a lot of energy in trying to prove who they are, right? So we come from the principle that ID is a right. As a result, helping build these infrastructures and these foundations that allow it. So Yudai mentioned transportation. For insurance, I can highlight, for health, I can highlight insurance, health professionals, even supply chain. We can provide a lot more efficiency in supply chain infrastructure, without which it's going to be very difficult to help the information system of the country. With PNSMP, some of my colleagues may talk a lot about that. With taxation, I was already mentioned earlier, pension programs, education, and so on. And other colleagues can take on.
Actually, in following up, maybe you can direct us in the direction of the principles, because Al mentioned an interesting principle. You started with the principle ID is a right. What other principles have guided your team's sort of collaboration together and your interface with the other stakeholders?
Okay, I think Miriam was about to add one point on the use cases, but before, perhaps Balahun, you can talk a little bit about the principles from the legal, from our proclamation perspective, as well as what makes the Ethiopian ID law stand out. I'm sure there is a lot of similarities with other national ID proclamations and acts. But
so what are your guiding principles?
Shall I continue?
Yes, Balahun, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairperson. So there are different principles indicated in our proclamation, and there are also different points that stand out our proclamation from other countries, because this proclamation we have since this proclamation is the one who is going to be approved lately, we got an opportunity to include points which other countries' proclamations lack. So some principles indicated in the proclamations are that the digital identification system, it should be organized in a way to be inclusive, free from discrimination, accessible, and with minimal barriers to entry and use. There are also other different principles. There are points that stand out of proclamation from other countries, like data minimization. We have tried to minimize the kind of information which are going to be collected just to have a unique ID number. We only require, actually we collect biometric informations and other demographic informations only for major informations are collected. Access control, we have tried to protect informations collected from the institution and from other institutions empowered by this institution. And there are only two exceptions just to access those informations. One, when there is a law that empowers other institutions to access those information. And the second exception is only through the order of court. Unless those two requirements are fulfilled, no one can access information collected, informations of individuals collected for the purpose of having unique number. Inclusions, we have tried to be very careful not to exclude people from getting different services because of not having a unique number or fida number, as it was called by His Excellency Yodahe. So we have tried to put different alternatives if people have not this ID number or unique number, and we have tried to make the process very easy just to get this unique number. There, we have also tried to see experience of other countries concerning other exclusions, because in some different countries, the law require having different information just to get this unique number, like having a birth certificate, or didn't put any exceptions if people don't have fingerprint because of different reasons, like disability or because of age. So I have tried to be very careful just to avoid this kind of problems. The cost, concerning cost, we have tried to make it a kind of service which can be accessed without any cost, actually. Concerning the purpose of the ID, we have tried to put what actually is ID going to serve. Just as it was mentioned, we have trying to make this foundational ID, which can give different services, which is going to replace the very backward Kabali ID system. Redressal mechanisms, we have tried to just to make it very modern kind of law, just to make anyone, just to let anyone to have an access to complain to the institution, and even with other laws like the Civil Code of Ethiopia, anyone who have any complaint, damage, or like that, he can bring the cases to the courts. And concerning accessibility of the law, we have tried to see experience of other countries that some laws prepared by local language, and it's very difficult to international community to access that law. And we have also seen other countries experience to the reverse. Some countries law prepared only in international language in English, and local community cannot have an access to that law. But for our purpose, where we just prepare the law in the local language Amharic and in international language English.
Right. Just to be clear, can you clarify what's the status of the legal legislation, the enabling environment, the data protection proclamation? Where are we in the legal landscape? And then we'll go back to Miriam.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the Ethiopian legislative drafting system, it is a kind of decentralized legislative drafting system, because every governmental institutions can prepare a draft law and present or submit to the Council of Ministers for approval and sending to the House of People Representatives for final approval. In Ethiopia, there are about 100, almost 115 institutions, and every governmental institution submits their draft to the Council of Ministers. But the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers prioritize this digital ID law. They select as one of the prioritized law and present submit to the for Council of Ministers agenda So this law is already approved by the Council of Ministers, and now it's already in the process of sending to the House of People Representative, because still now, even though the draft has already approved before almost one month, but the Council of Ministers, the Prime Minister Office didn't send that law because the House of People Representatives, they are not in working session currently. They will come back within the next month, and it is proposed to be one of their first agenda when they start the session. And the national
does that include data protection proclamation?
No, it is already submitted to the Council of Ministers, and there are different.
So it's coming after it.
Yes,
the data protection proclamation is submitted to the Council of Ministers, and after that, it will go to the Parliament to be voted on. Okay, yeah, so give us an idea about timelines so that quickly, because we're running out of time. I want to go back to Miriam, and then I want to address a couple of very important questions. So let's speed up a little bit, please.
Thank you very much. So the personal data proclamation, the People's at Council of Ministers or at Prime Minister Office told us that this is going to be one of the priority of the Council of Ministers. So we hope it will be approved by the Council of Ministers within the next either days or within next month, and will be sent to the House of People Representative. Concerning the digital ID law, actually, after it's already submitted to the House of People Representative, people from Council of Ministers, they will send this law within the next 2 or 3 days. And once it is delivered at the House of People Representative, that will be led by the agenda of the House. But according to their working procedure regulation number 6, they have only 21 days to approve that law. And
okay, so very soon. Miriam, did you want to add anything to the discussion so far, or do I move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the stakeholder and maybe relating it to the principles as well. I touched upon interoperability earlier, which is quite important because we want to achieve interoperability and have the ability to have interfaces. Another very important one was inclusion, and that touches upon maybe the stakeholders, which is how do we actually achieve enrollment as fast as possible to make sure that all the barriers to access identification is removed. So in terms of stakeholders, I think people that already have large databases and the low-hanging fruits like the tax identification systems and so on to be prioritized. So yeah, making sure that inclusion and social programs are included and prioritized as it is in the principles. So leveraging existing systems and so on. So yeah, I just wanted to.
No, this is good. So I wanna sort of do an exchange with you, Yodahi. You can switch it to your team if you want, but I want short answers to a couple of questions. The first thing is you've stated that you wanted sovereignty from the start in the development of this project, and therefore you built it on open source. So my question for you is, how are you building capacity in order for you to be able to ingest the open source and be able to integrate it with the interfaces that you need and interoperability that Miriam was talking about?
So sovereignty from the start, it's very crucial. We've been, as latecomers, we've been able to learn from a lot of other national ID rollouts. India is a good example, Philippines, Nigeria, Rwanda, Morocco, you name it. So we've been lucky enough to benchmark sovereignty by design, sovereignty from the start, etc. So taking the learnings from all of that, we've been able to design a project so that we avoid the pitfalls of government-led, state-driven project where it's not citizen-centered, where the data and the user control is not in the hands of the resident, etc. So that was I'm not sure if I've addressed your question.
No, the question is, I mean, you need capacity, you need technical skills, you need people that can do this. Did you go out and to the universities, to the private sector? Did you recruit? How do you building capacity to deal with the development of the project? Because you're doing a lot in-house.
Correct. Yeah. So the funny thing is, for instance, the first time the engineering team decided to check MOSIP and what it looks like, the MOSIP team did not know about it. We just downloaded it from the internet and started tinkering with it. It's after a while that we signed an MOU and made it formal. So there is obviously a very thin line where we have to balance technology ownership with key deliverables, with KPIs. Ownership of digital ID, rollout of digital ID is more important than technology ownership. Even though technology ownership is also important, there has to be we have to trade a very thin line in making sure that we're able to meet our national targets. We want to issue at least 70 million digital IDs by 2025, and that's our utmost priority. But while we're doing it, we want to make sure that we're not building a black box where we don't understand what's inside. We're just counting the number of digital IDs issued. So we want to avoid that scenario. So we're trying to balance reliance on local knowledge, local skills, but also making sure we meet our targets.
Do you intend to issue any credentials?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. As Dr. Joseph, you mentioned, we're a young program and there's a lot of work in progress. But as far as the ID law is concerned, the ID law does not mandate credentials as mandatory. So what the ID law defines as ID, as digital ID, is basically the number. However, mobile ID or basic cards or plastic cards, etc., are on the table. It's very important, as we've learned from other countries, it's very important to have a physical version of your digital ID in your pockets, without which there would be less adoption, less trust. And so, of course, in cases of offline connectivity or lack of or low infrastructure, rural areas, credentials are important. So we're working with our own model of where we distribute basic cards, as well as work with the Gabale ID and the local city governments and the local government to issue credentials.
Now, what, in your opinion, would be the opportunities for, let's say, the technology providers and the solution providers to collaborate with you? What will be those opportunities? What's the roadmap? Are you going to issue an RFP? What's going to happen?
Yes, so we're working with an international consultant to help us prepare consultancy firm to help us prepare RFPs. So once those RFPs are ready, RFPs for hardware, for software, they will be made public, and hopefully within the next few months, we'll be able to go through this process so that we can launch our national rollout early.
Okay. Now, do you mind explaining how you're financed?
So far, most of the financing for the past recently completed phase, the pilot phase, and the current phase, where we call it the pre-launch phase between the pilot and the national rollout. So we're mostly financed through government, but we also get support, recruitment support, procurement support from different international organizations, ID4D, UNECA, BMGF, to name a few. But looking forward, we've not yet inked a financing agreement with any international organizations yet, but we're hopeful that we soon enough will be able to sign.
So the pilot is completed. So could you describe what is the pilot phase mean and what lessons maybe we can extract from it?
Henok, perhaps you can tackle this one.
Yes. Thank you, Dahe. Thank you, Dr. Atik. So the pilot started quite a few months back, and it's already concluded a couple of months ago. So we have achieved a registration of, we are now approaching 1 million registration, and that registration is done in different modalities. We used a use case approach where we tested different use cases and setups. So some of the use cases were in urban and, for instance, educated environments, such as in the banks and so on. But also, majority of Ethiopia is in a rural setup. So we selected a specific use case that is called the Productive Safety Net Program. That we obtained quite a lot of learning from that will be helpful for the design of the national rollout. So now we are on a pre-launch phase, which is the initial stage of the national rollout, and we are procuring more registration kits because we have to achieve targets of 12 million and 70 million respectively in at least to the end of 2025, and we are preparing an outsourcing arrangement to help us achieve that. We are also testing systems for integration. We have tested integration with a few banks and with the revenue system that was just being explained by Yodahe and other colleagues. So we are also developing technical capability of the in-house team so that based on the learning of the pilot. This learnings focus, I can categorize it into 2 or 3. For the registration part, we have obtained relevant insights on the experience of the people during the registration. That again helps us design a better national rollout in terms of registration center setup, facilitation, demographic, and especially biometric data capture, because there are sometimes difficulties in capturing fingerprints or irises and so on. There is also the experience of exception handling for some rare or unique cases that will be address the issues of inclusion and so. We have also learned that NID cannot accomplish this task alone. So we have to onboard other factors, either through outsourcing or onboarding other relying parties. As for communication, we need to define tailored and clear communication that will give a better awareness and understanding of fida, because that is important for the adoption of fida through the community. We also need to tackle preconceived attitude towards technological solutions, some of which we have shared with your platform in previous sessions.
Right.
We also need to prove relevance and why people should enroll to ID system or the fida system. In that, we are thinking of demonstrating end-to-end solutions so that people could see the benefit of the ID system and appreciate its added value, and so that more people would decide to come on board. Other issues include, we will introduce pre-registration that will help us increase the registration, reduce the registration time, and card printing is also another important lesson that we have learned that helps people to adopt the ID system. And thank you.
Let me clarify. So far, the pilot has really focused on enrollment and onboarding. Have you developed any expertise and experience in building an authentication architecture for service delivery?
So we, as I mentioned earlier, while benchmarking other countries, our authentication architecture is work in progress, definitely, because we're at a relatively early stage. Right. But when we benchmark other countries, there is an intermediary entity between service provider and the ID authority. Some call it a trusted service provider. And there's also other intermediaries with different roles where they can store personal data subject to legal provisions. They call them account aggregators because KYC is defined differently if you ask a bank as compared to if you ask a health service provider. For the health service provider, the KYC data should contain perhaps the weight of the person or the blood type of the person. But when you go to the bank, they need to know the income level or the credit history, etc. So that's all of that is part of KYC. And what we provide is only the foundational layer the basic, the very basic layer, and of course the assurance of uniqueness. So we're working to include these, the roles, or properly define the role of an account aggregator, properly define the role of a TSP, trusted service provider, and we have most of it pretty much figured out what the authentication architecture should look like. And the next few months, we hope to see some real-world applications where we are offering authentication services.
Are you planning on making social protection or social programs among the early priority rollouts that you expect? Are you working with any Ministry of Social Affairs to identify programs, for example, helping the poor?
Yeah, of course, there is a productive safety net program. Perhaps Miriam can talk more about what the PSNP looks like, but in our pilot, we've worked with a productive safety net program just to register the beneficiaries. So it's low-income people, low-income families who either get benefits in kind or benefits in cash. But it's a very ripe or low-hanging fruit use case because there is a problem of ghost accounts, there is a problem of exclusion. Perhaps Miriam can talk about social programs. Or...
Yes, absolutely. So the safety net is for the bottom of the pyramid for food insecure waradas, which are our districts. And so that covers about 15 to 18 million people, taking into account households. So, and all safety nets cards currently are manual, and they have, manual IDs. So having a digital ID would ensure that the beneficiary of the safety net would receive the right people would receive the right support, and also would help us to graduate faster the people, because we would know who they are in a more transparent way. So we would gain obviously volume in terms of enrollment speed, and on top of that have a major social issue resolved.
We've run out of time. I want to close by asking you, you can orchestrate. Can you share with us the top 3 lessons that you've learned now that you're 2 years old and you can walk? So what are the top 3 lessons that you can tell your colleagues, your brothers and sisters in other countries around the world from your experience that really marked you, that really came out, stood out in your mind, having not been in the ID business, but then you got into it now 2 years later? What would you say the top lessons?
So let me start. I'm not sure if we can stop at 3 because it could be more lessons learned, but let me start by making 1 or 2 points. One is a national ID authority is not supposed to be a one-stop shop where all the data about an individual or resident, a citizen is found. The more fields, the more attributes you add to your national rollout. If you're adding marital status, if you're adding level of income, occupation, you name it, whether the field is sensitive or it's a very trivial attribute, you're adding months and years into the completion or the achievement of your targets. So focusing on the basics, even though it seems counterintuitive, it's always the best way to roll out. So focus on the foundational attributes. I'd say that's one of the biggest lessons. And the other one is technology nowadays, perhaps a decade ago, 2 decades ago, it was not available, but nowadays it's more user-centric. So user control, the citizen has to know who has access to their data, who's currently holding their personal data, etc. So the current architecture, most of the current architecture, such as the platform we use, MOSIP, allows for it, and it's very important. It's a good selling point to the residents that someone you don't know, some ghost institution is not accessing your data. You know exactly who has been accessing your data. So that kind of transparency, thanks to the technology and the architecture, is possible. So it's a good attribute to leverage. I open the floor to colleagues about lessons learned.
Yeah, just give me one more, and then if you have even more, we take, but one more at least.
Yeah, I wish I had more time, but I just want to say it was a lot was discussed. So at the end of the day, ID is not the product. The service is the product, and those services are received by the functional agency. So a lot of the questions that we can answer from the ID perspective, but I think the very key point that was discussed earlier was the issue of stakeholders. So what ID has been doing is really going out and identifying all the different stakeholders, whether health, transportation, tax systems, and hopefully as a result of ID being the foundation, the citizen can get better and improve services, and that's reflected in their day-to-day life. So I'll
Okay.
back to my colleagues.
If I may add a point, Dr. Joseph.
Please.
A good lesson that we learned from our pilot stage, but also from experience abroad, other ID implementation schemes that have advanced. One is we would like to approach the ID implementation in a use case. So we want to try the implementation, the authentication and implementation of a use case in parallel with the registration. That would help us advance the acceptance of ID throughout the population. The other is some countries have done it alone. The government has done it alone. Other countries have adopted a completely outsourced model. Ethiopia has positioned itself in between, where government or NIDP will have its own role, but also to realize the sort of objective in the timeline given, we will, of course, adopt an outsourcing mechanism as well. Thank you.
Well, this is an excellent point. I think use cases are what drives enrollment, and enrollment what makes use cases even more powerful, because this is a chicken and egg problem, but you need to start in parallel. You need to believe that you cannot wait till you've got the foundational system sitting and then start thinking, oh, what use cases are we going to do this? This is why I find that in many countries, social protection, social safety nets provide a significant boost to enrollment, because these are people that are really desperate to have some help and assistance, and they need to be taken care of, unlike a tax program or driver's license or passports, where these are privileged people. They're already in a database, they already are receiving services. By focusing on the bottom sort of quarter of the population, you're able to achieve two things. You're able to deliver value to those who need it most, but also you're able to achieve some level of momentum, because you're getting enrollments faster than if you just relied on use cases only targeting the well-to-do people. So unless somebody needs to make one last point, I'd like to really thank you for this wonderful insights that you've shared, and for being generous with the identity community, and everybody. It's definitely will benefit from what you had to say. Again, this is work in progress, and that's why I think this was an exciting discussion, because it gives us an insight about how you're doing it. I mean, essentially, you're changing the tires on a car while it's still moving at 60 miles an hour. So I understand how you're doing this. You're not waiting to stop and arrive and do what you need to do. There have been some questions that were some were answered in the course of discussion, but if there is any opportunity to answer some of them, if they were very specific, and contact the person who raised the questions, please do so. We encourage you to do so. In the meantime, once again, thank you, and we look forward to getting more updates from you as we reconvene again through various segments within the LiveCast and within the annual general meeting. So once again, thank you very, very much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph, and I thank the ID4Africa team for setting up these very good platforms. It's thanks to ID4Africa that we've learned and we've been made aware of the major players in the ID ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Okay, operator, you can put a message at the end, but leave a little bit of the chat and the question and answer, so that if there's any opportunity to answer some of them before we terminate the session. Thank you all, and please to the audience, We look forward to seeing you in another major episode on the 19th of October. So please stay with us. Come back in the 19th of October. There is something also very intense and information rich.